Hello there, my name is Prometheus Vander Mitsubishi, and I was once employed by a family of rats to steal books from charity shops in exchange for scented candles. I'm here today to talk about games, specifically the games I've reviewed over the last 12 months, or just over 12 months. You can never be too sure, the Time Mother is a fickle mistress. You never know when she might pull the rug out from underneath you and add another day to February. 28? 29? Make up your damn mind. What's next? 30? There have got to be rules, Janet. You can't just do whatever you want, temperamental bitch. Anyway, I've reviewed a handful of games over the year of 2023, and also the last few months of 2022. I've made my thoughts on them unbelievably clear, for better or worse, and whether you like it or not, I am right. But even though I decide whether a game is shit and deserves to be burned as a sacrifice to the gods of the sky, I only ever talk about them in isolation. Aside from a small number of exceptions, I never compare them to each other. It's that sort of unhealthy competition and toxic mindset that I think is missing from my life, so I thought, why not pit all these individual games against each other and see how they stack up? Like a game of Jenga, except instead of wooden bricks, I'm using the hard work of hundreds of stressed game developers. That sounds like fun, right? We're gonna do this in the form of a tier list. If you don't know what a tier list is, get out from beneath your rock and live a little. We're going to have 5 tiers to separate the 32 games based on their shitness. The highest tier for the best games I thought needed to have a very strong name, something that sounds impossible to overcome. I was going to go with Goliath, but then I remembered how that story goes, so I instead settled on Roscoe. Great name, I think. The teeth beneath that is for the games that are good, just not as good as Roscoe's games. I decided to call it The Majesty of Autumn, because autumn is cool as fuck. The middle tier is for the mid-range games that are about average, sometimes better than, sometimes worse than, but they're in the close vicinity of average. This tier bridges the gap between the good games and the bad games. It's between the front and the back, so I've named this tier Perineum. Then we've got the tier for bad games that should be ashamed of themselves, even despite their good qualities. I think it's only fair to name this tier Stay Away From My Daughter, because I don't want my daughter seeing this. I don't have a daughter, but the sentiment still applies. And finally the tier for the worst of the worst, which I'm calling Fart in the Shower. Not the name of my first band, just something that is truly awful. You know when you fart in the shower and it produces this toxic, putrid, rancid chemical reaction of a smell, and it just makes you wonder what the point of living is? It's pretty bad, and a more than fitting name for the worst tier. Now that we've done the admin, let's get ranking. Whoa, and we have now entered unscripted mode. Ooh! Anything could happen now. I can say whatever I want. I could burp into the microphone. I can't burp on command. Anyway, we're gonna rank these 32 games based on how good or bad they are, which I sort of already explained in the pre-recorded part, so I don't know why I'm saying it again, but here I am saying it again. I just love to repeat myself. And we're gonna do this, the tier list. I've not gone through and found images of the game covers because I honestly can't be bothered to do that. I've already got the thumbnails for my reviews, so I'm just going to use them. You know what game I'm talking about because I'm going to be speaking about them, so you don't have to worry about what it represents because you're going to know, okay? You're clever, I believe in you. You're smarter than you think you are. So we're going to start with the first game that I reviewed in late September 2022, Spyro Enter the Dragonfly. Let's talk about it. So, Spyro Enter the Dragonfly. For a bit of context, when I first played this game, I wasn't intending to actually review it. At that point in my channel, I was just doing this thing where I was doing cut-com playthroughs, so I would just play a game and commentate over it and then edit it down into sort of 15-20 minute videos just to fill the void, because I didn't know what I wanted to do with the channel at that point. And one of the games I was going to play for a playthrough was Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, because the only Spyro games I'd ever played were the first 3. I didn't know what came after that in the world of Spyro, and I wanted to venture out into the unknown. So I went with Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, because that was Spyro 4. I was under the impression that that's what it was. And as I was playing it, and I was going through the motions of the cut-com playthrough, and I was commentating and living that experience, I thought, wow, this game is shit. And this playthrough is not going to do justice to how shit this game is, so I need to script a video solely about how bad this game is. And it was pretty shocking, especially on like a technical level. I have gone back and played through it again since then because I wanted better footage of it, because the footage I used in the original review is fucking dog shit. It's the sort of like home video, family, wedding, sort of old, terrible quality sort of thing. That was a terrible string of words, but you know what I mean. It just looked bad, and I wanted better footage. Playing it again a second time, I think I was a bit harsh on it. It is bad, but it's not as bad as I made it out to be. I think definitely on a technical level, it's a piece of shit. But, you know, the gameplay isn't that bad. It can be enjoyed. If you like Spyro, you are going to like this game, even with its hang-ups. It's not as bad as I made it out to be. And I actually did enjoy it playing through a second time, even went as far as to 100% complete it that time. So it's not as bad as I made it out to be, but it is quite shocking. It can barely hold itself together, and I think that needs to be punished. So in terms of its position on the tier list, I think Stay Away From My Daughter is apt. I was considering Fart in the Shower, but considering it sort of redeemed itself on its second playthrough, well, not completely redeemed, it was still quite bad, but it did get better. It was better than the first time, so it wasn't as bad as I had in my head. So I think, despite it being a technical disaster and having some game design choices that are questionable, it's not the worst thing in the world, and I think putting it in Stay Away From My Daughter is fair enough. So after playing and reviewing Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, I decided that I had a lot of fun reviewing that game and wanted to try it again, so I went for Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, which is another game that is sort of infamous for being a bit shit. But I sort of had a different take on this one. I held it in a more positive light, because I think people are a bit harsh on it. Like, obviously it's not as good as the original 3 games, which it was trying to replicate. It has issues, it's not as tight, it's a bit floatier, it is a bit... Well, I say that like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, it's a different thing, and I think I do make that point in the video. People just don't like it because it's different, not because it's bad. Obviously, the elephant in the room is the vehicles, but I was on the side of some of the vehicles, because the vehicles can ruin games like this. Vehicles can be just so bad that they make you want to tear your eyes out and eat them. But I think some of them in Wrath of Cortex are like that, but not all of them. There are some that are sort of woven into the standard levels that I think work really well. So yeah, I was sort of, you know, don't knock it until you try it. Some of them are alright. And on top of that, it is presented quite well. It doesn't look great, but it does sound pretty good, and it, you know, it fulfills the brief of what a Crash game should be. You know, it doesn't try anything or do anything so egregiously out of character or so shockingly bad that it makes me want to go on a violent rampage. It stuck within the parameters, it stuck to the brief, and it did it reasonably well. I don't think there's anything to really pull apart with it and tear a second arsehole for. And especially compared to Enter the Dragonfly, it's a technical marvel. You know, well, there are some performance issues, there are bad loading times, but beyond that, it's pretty solid. So I think, you know, underrated and overhated, I think Wrath of Cortex is, and because of that, it's got a bit of the bit of good, bit of bad. You know, it's sort of an even balance. You know, it's not out. It's you know what I mean. It's got two sides of a coin. Well, every coin has two sides. It's a stupid fucking analogy, but you know what I mean. It's just as good as it is bad. I personally think it's more on the good side, but I can see the argument for both ways. So I think it's fair enough that it belongs in the middle of the tier list somewhere. So I'm going to put it in perineum. And that brings us to Super Mario 64, the first of my controversial takes in this series of reviews. For those who haven't seen the original video, the premise is everyone loves this game, everyone adores Super Mario 64 and think it's one of the best games ever made. And I played it out of curiosity, and I think it is absolutely fucking bad. I think it's a terrible game, and I did not enjoy any part of playing it. There's a lot I don't like about it. I would recommend watching the full video to get my proper thoughts, because I can't really condense them all that much in a way that makes sense and really gets the point across. But basically, I don't like the way it, first of all, looks. I think it looks disgusting. It looks like baby vomit. I don't like the way it's designed. It seems very random and not very well thought through. It doesn't flow very well. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just really bad. The music is fine. That's probably the most positive thing I have to say about it. It's just a really, annoying and painful game to play. It's a bit of a slog. It's just fuck off, you know? It's one of those fuck off games. I will admit, I personally was in a bad mood when I played it for the review, but I think everything I said still stands the test of time, and I think I am right. I did get a lot of It was a sort of weird response, because there are a lot of comments that were saying, "Oh, thank you so much for voicing this opinion. Now I know I'm not the only one who thinks that this game is bad." And I was like, oh, people agree with me. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a full-on, onslaught of Nintendo fucking simps or whatever. But no, there were quite a few people who agreed with me. But then there were also quite a few people who said I was fucking stupid, and I should not be allowed to voice any opinions on anything ever. Which is a bit extreme, but, it's a free world. Well, it's not a free world, but people are allowed to say what they want to say. And, fair enough, I respect you for voicing your opinion. What I really loved, though, there was this one comment that I got that was like, "Oh, this video is clearly rage bait. This guy is just trying to get a reaction." But what's interesting is a lot of the points he's making are actually true. And I just find that so funny. Like, this guy's thought, oh, this guy is clearly doing this on purpose. He's trying to make me angry. But he's actually right. Like, that's so funny to me. But yeah, I do not like this game. I think it is a bad game. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I have played games that are worse than it. And it does have some redeeming qualities, so I can't put it in fart in the shower, no matter how desperately I want to. It's not that bad, but I still think it is pretty shocking, and I would never play it again, even with a gun to my anus. So, I'm going to put it in Stay Away From My Daughter with Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, which some people would see as blasphemy, but I don't care because I'm right. Next up is Scooby-Doo Unmasked, which I believe I reviewed for Halloween in 2022. It's obviously a licensed game. Licensed games tend to be pretty bad. I don't know what it is, if it's like the lack of creative freedom and the need to stick to source material, or if it's just, I don't know, there's just a trend of licensed games being really shit. But when I played Scooby-Doo Unmasked, which I did have as a kid, and I did play it as a kid, but I didn't get very far in it because I was obviously a kid and not capable of doing anything basic that required any sort of coordination or lateral thinking or anything like that. I wasn't able to do it, but now as an adult, I was able to do it, and I was genuinely surprised that it was actually a decent game. I don't know why, I was just expecting it because it's a licensed game to be bad. And I guess that just goes to show you can't treat everything at face value as what you think they are. That didn't flow very well as a sentence, but I said it, and you know what I mean. So yeah, Scooby-Doo Unmasked was surprisingly good. It's a pretty basic platformer, but it has a lot going for it. It certainly fits the world of Scooby-Doo. It feels like a Scooby-Doo episode, which I think, that's quite hard to do in a game, but they pulled it off, so congrats to the team who made it. Yeah, I just thought it wasn't the best game I've ever played. There's definitely a lot better than it, but it was surprisingly decent. And I think it's fair enough to say it belongs in the perineum section of the tier list, because, it's an enjoyable one-time thing. I wouldn't dedicate more than one playthrough to it, but it was pretty fun, and I enjoyed it. So I think perineum is a good place for it. We now have Donkey Kong Country stepping up to the plate. Donkey Kong Country is another one of those games that's really, really popular and beloved, and people really like it. So it was another one of those things where I thought, okay, everyone loves this, which means that I think this game is going to be pretty bad. That tends to be the case. I have a natural aversion to popular things. I don't know why. Maybe there's something wrong with me. But it's just one of those things where I thought I'm not going to enjoy this as much as everyone says I'm going to enjoy this. But Donkey Kong Country actually turned out pretty alright. It was fun, it was pretty tough, and a lot of that was down to some unfair bullshit. Donkey Kong Country did what I like to call cheap shots quite a lot, which is where things like enemies and hazards would just pop in off screen and you wouldn't be able to do anything about it. You wouldn't have enough time to react and adapt to the situation. You would just die and you would have to start again. Which is pretty, I don't like to see that in a game. That's very disappointing and disheartening, and I think you could have been so much better had you not done that and you just chose to do it. It's like watching a child, instead of pursuing some noble cause, they go down the line of drugs and graffiti and stealing from libraries. It's just a shame. But it wasn't that bad. Donkey Kong Country, most of the time, was pretty fair. And it was a fun game. It looks pretty good. The music was absolutely phenomenal. Oh my god. It was just a really solid game all around. Aside from the whole cheap shot thing, it was pretty fucking good. So I think the Majesty of Autumn. I'm going to put it in the Majesty of Autumn. I think that's a very good place for it. Now onto Bubsy 3D. I look back on my decision to play this game, and I cringe about it, because what the fuck was I thinking? Before I played Bubsy 3D, and when I decided that was the next game I wanted to review, because I'd heard so much about it, and I just wanted to see what it was all about, and thought, it can't be that bad, can it? People are obviously just exaggerating. It can't be that shit. And I look back on those thoughts and think, you fucking moron. What is wrong with you? I can't believe that that's what I thought. Having played Bubsy 3D, Jesus Christ, I can't believe they shipped that out and sold that to people. It's such a fucking bad game. I'm sitting here, having already reviewed it, and I've refreshed my memory and looked back on my script for that video, I cannot think of a single redeeming quality about Bubsy 3D. I like the fact that there's an option to quit the game. That's pretty cool. It means you can stop playing it. That's a pretty redeeming factor. I think you're not trapped in Bubsy purgatory for the rest of existence. That's nice. I liked being able to escape. But the actual game, fuck me. What went wrong? What happened? It is one of the worst interactive experiences I've ever had. And I once had a giraffe come to my school in a giant bus to teach me about saying no to pedophiles. Come on, what happened here? It's just such a bad game. And I think there's absolutely, surprising to no one, Bubsy 3D is going in fart in the shower. This is a shit game, and everyone involved in it should be arrested. I think that's a fair punishment. Fart in the shower for Bubsy 3D, and it can thank me for that. That's a generous placement. If I could go lower, I would. So after playing Bubsy 3D and wanting to wash the filth out of my mouth, I decided to go to a game that I was familiar with and review that. And that game happened to be Crash Bandicoot, the original one. Now, my thoughts on this game in the review are that it's good, but not as good as people seem to think it is. It's one of those things where it's praised for everything that came after it. This is the first game, it set the foundation, but the things people like about Crash Bandicoot honestly really came later. The Crash 2 and Crash 3, obviously the best games in the whole series, that's what everyone says. This game, Crash Bandicoot, the original one, is sort of credited for that, because it laid the foundation, it birthed 2 and 3, and I think that's not fair, really, because Crash Bandicoot itself, in isolation, it's good, but it's not that good. It's got quite a few issues, and I do go into detail about what they are, the main one being, I think the save system is shit, and it is very primitive gameplay, so it has some problems, but it is still pretty good. I think I want to put it in perineum. I don't think it's good enough to be in the Majesty of Autumn. I think it has too much holding it back for that, but it's not a bad game. So I think putting it in the higher end of perineum is a fair placement. And look, I'm glad that it spawned a very successful franchise and one that is, I think, my favorite in all gaming. But, I don't want to unfairly credit it. You gotta be fair in these sorts of things, right? I then moved on to Spyro the Dragon, the first one, and my personal favourite Spyro game. And the reason for that is that it's just one of the most satisfying and relaxing and therapeutic games I've ever played. It's almost like video game ASMR. It's just such a relaxing and enjoyable experience. It's like ecstasy. Going around, exploring the levels, finding all of the treasure, rescuing all the dragons, going for 100%. It's just so satisfying. It feels like this is what life is about. Do you know what I mean? It's just such a euphoric sensation playing Spyro the Dragon. There are some things that I think could be improved. There isn't a lot of variety in the environments. There are a lot of castles, and I do like castles, but I don't like that many castles. I would have preferred a bit more variety in the locales, so to speak. But yeah, it's just a really good game. I think objectively, it could do with a bit more content because it really is just running around picking things up. But I really like that. So I think the majesty of autumn is where I'm going to put it. You know, there's room for improvement, but it's still really fucking solid. And I would honestly, if you're having a stressful time, you need a game to just relax and have all of your issues just wash over you, just play Spyro the Dragon. You cannot go wrong with it. It is one of the most relaxing, therapeutic games out there, and I mean that. I never lie. Everything I say is true. So you have to take my word for it. Croc Legend of the Gobbos is up next. This is one of those games that I had sort of heard of and knew of in my sort of, I was going to say peripheral vision, but that's not what I meant. But the idea is there. It's sort of on my radar. But I didn't really know much about it. I had played it briefly at a friend's house some 10 years before I reviewed it. Well, I don't know if 10 years is accurate. It's probably more like 5 or 6. I have no concept of time. Anyway, I remember playing it briefly and not really, I don't really remember much of it, but I sort of thought it was, whatever. That's sort of the impression I got from it. Having played the full thing for the review, I would say whatever is apt, but it's a more positive whatever than I was expecting. Because it is solid. It's alright. It's a fun game. It can be fun most of the time. It is very basic, and it has some controls that I'm not particularly fond of. The bosses are pretty bad. Everything is quite generic, but it is, it scratches the gaming itch. It's enjoyable. I struggled to think of a word there, but you can enjoy this game, and it is fun to a degree. Not that much, but it is fun. It's definitely a lot of room for improvement. You could fit, I want to say, an entire kitchen of improvement into Croc Legend of the Gobbos, but it is still pretty decent. So I think, Perineum is a good place to put it. It's decent, it has issues, it's sort of mid-range, so I think putting it in the Perineum is the right thing to do. Up next is Sonic 06. Probably the most infamous bad game in the history of all gaming. That's a pretty big claim, but I think, it's up there. Up there with the likes of Bubsy 3D. I think it should tell you everything that my copy of Sonic 06, the case, does not have a cover. It has the generic sort of EB Games placeholder cover. It doesn't even have the actual box art on it. And I think that should tell you everything about the quality of the game. It's a fucking disaster. But it's like, it's a technical mess. The gameplay is pretty bad. The performance is pretty bad. Everything looks pretty bad. The story is pretty bad. It's just all around pretty bad. But it's one of those things where it's sort of glorious in how bad it is. Like, I think in the video I call it the best worst game ever. Because it's one of those games you can enjoy ironically. It's one of those ones where you can play it and sort of laugh at how bad it is and have a good time. It's one of those sorts of things. And that sort of endears me to it a little bit. But, I can't, as a critical thinker and as someone who respects their own opinions and wants to do the right thing, I can't, in good faith, put this any higher than Fart in the Shower, because it is an absolute fucking shit show. But it is, one of the most glorious shit shows I've ever seen, and I would be up for playing it again, just for a laugh. And in a way, that's something to respect, I think. So Congratulations, Sonic 06. You are shit, but you can be funny. Something we all aspire to be. And on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. Now, in this video, or the review that I did for this game, I'm pretty sure I say that Crash 2 is literally a bee's dick away from being a perfect sequel to the first game. I don't think, apart from one thing, I don't think Crash 2 takes a wrong step. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. The gameplay is great, it looks great, it sounds great, the way its progression is laid out is fantastic. There's almost nothing wrong with it. The only thing holding it back is the fact that its boss fights are not the best. Engines is pretty good, Tiny's is alright, the other three, pretty shocking. But if that's the worst part of your game, you know you've got a pretty phenomenal game on your hands. And the fact that I even considered calling this a perfect sequel, perfect, that's a pretty bold word to use in a review. So I think, that really speaks for itself and says, hey, this game isn't fucking around. This is a near masterpiece. So I think, to no one's surprise, Crash 2 is going in Roscoe. This is one of Roscoe's games. Roscoe would recommend this to his friends. That's the sort of level we're on here. Because, it's the only thing wrong with it is the lackluster boss fights. That's it. There's nothing else I can think of that's bad about it. Congratulations. This is one of the best games I've played, personally. It's probably potentially biased because it is the first game I ever played, and I do have a soft spot for it. But, even despite that, I think I am, I'm on the right side of history. I'm telling the truth here. And Crash 2, nearly perfect game, deserves to be in Roscoe's tier. Following a similar sort of path is Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, which is actually called Spyro 2 Gateway to Glimmer in PAL regions. For some reason, I'm not sure why, but anyway, Spyro 2, even though it's not my favourite Spyro game, my favourite is the first one, which I already said, I think Spyro 2 did make all of the right improvements on the first game, because even though the first game was really relaxing and satisfying to play, it was missing a bit of content. It felt like something was missing in the objectives, and Spyro 2 does address that by adding in the orbs. You've got these mini games and these side challenges and these other objectives you have to handle to go for 100%, in addition to picking up all of the gems. So I think, objectively, Spyro 2 is better than the first game, certainly, and potentially better than Spyro 3. I'll get onto that. But yeah, I think it made the right improvements, it improved in the right places, it did the right thing, it progressed as a person. That sort of thing should be celebrated. We all got to work on ourselves and make improvements to our lives and address our shortcomings and just evolve and grow and become better. And that's what Spyro 2 did. So I think it's going to join Crash 2 up in Roscoe. And I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. And if you do argue with that, you're talking to a fucking brick wall, because I'm not going to hear you. This is a YouTube video, but, more power to you, I guess. But Spyro 2 in Roscoe. That feels right. It belongs there. Unfortunately, the Roscoe train did not carry on forever. It came to an abrupt end when I played Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now, I was sort of expecting this game to be really good because it was made by Rare, who made Banjo-Kazooie, which is an absolutely amazing game, and I'll get onto that shortly. So I was expecting Conker's Bad Fur Day to be basically an adult version of that. A more mature, humor-centric version of Banjo-Kazooie. It is not that. Obviously, it is carried by its personality. It's very crude, very mature, very disgusting in a lot of places. And that's sort of its whole thing. Also a lot of pop culture references. It basically just became a hodgepodge. Is that a word? A hodgepodge of all different types of the developer's humor, which then basically became a cesspool of bodily fluids. Which was funny for about 5 minutes and then got old very quickly. Obviously, all of the personality is there to distract you from the fairly lackluster gameplay. What Conker's Bad Fur Day is basically a lot of walking around and just sort of aimlessly going through the motions of whatever story each level is putting together. There's not much actual gameplay going on until you get to the end of the game where it becomes a third-person shooter. And I don't know what the hell they were thinking with that. That was the worst possible thing they could have done. Like, I just don't understand why they took that approach. What they should have done was just made it a platformer and then drenched it in that mature humor. But instead, I think they focused on the mature humor and thought, oh, we actually have to make a game, so let's put some levels in. Like, it just didn't work very well. Obviously, it was, an amusing game, but once the novelty of it wears off, you think, man, what am I doing, I could be getting a degree, and here I am, watching a fucking squirrel piss on a walking drug-dealing flame. Like, it's just... what are we doing, And because of that, I think Conker's Bad Fur Day has to go in Stay Away From My Daughter, because even though it has personality, it's not enough to make the game good. It doesn't carry the game enough to the point where it's enjoyable the whole way through. So I think Stay Away From My Daughter is fair. Having felt betrayed by Rare due to the literal shit show that was Conker's Bad Fur Day, I decided to play Banjo-Kazooie and review that, just to make sure I wasn't absolutely insane and had some weird Mandela effect where Banjo-Kazooie was a good game, but in fact it just wasn't. I mean, I did play it, and honestly, Banjo-Kazooie is fucking phenomenal. It is one of the best platformers that I've played, and I mean that. I know I say that about quite a few games, but I mean it every time. And Banjo-Kazooie, it's one of those things where it's just a very simple, fun collectathon. There's no bullshit, there's no extremely complicated objectives and weird sort of connected worlds, which I'll get into in a later game that's related to this one, that I was not happy with. It's just a very simple, straightforward, enjoyable 3D platformer collectathon. And it has, it has charm, it has personality, it just has everything going for it. I'd say the only thing I didn't like about it was that there are a lot of moves and it can be sort of annoying to fumble your way through them with the C-stick. But beyond that, it's pretty much perfect. And I think it's going to join the likes of Crash and Spyro 2 in Roscoe, because it's just that good. I can barely think of anything wrong with it. So yeah, Roscoe it is. Now we're back to Crash again with Crash Bandicoot Warped, also known as Crash 3, because it is the third one. Now, there's a big debate in the Crash community that I'm not really a part of, but I am sort of aware of, and that's if I could speak, that would be really helpful. There's a debate whether Crash 2 or Crash 3 is the better one. And there's a lot of argument about why Crash 2 is better than Crash 3 or why Crash 3 is better than Crash 2. I think, objectively speaking, Crash 2 is better than Crash 3, because Crash 3, while the third one is very, very solid and carries over, the same fun gameplay for the second game, it does also get a little bit distracted with some extra shit. There's a lot more emphasis on vehicles, some of which are pretty bad. A lot of them are alright, but most of them are just like, can we not do this? I'd rather go through on foot if that's alright. And there's also the power-ups that I don't like that were introduced in Crash 3. I think that was a mistake. Especially the Death Tornado Spin and Fruit Bazooka. Cool as they are to look at, they take away from the gameplay, I think. They make it too easy, they're overpowered, and I don't like that. I like to be challenged. I want to feel pain. Anyway, so I think Crash 2 is better than Crash 3, but I don't want to discredit Crash 3 because it is really, really solid. It's got really amazing visuals and effects, and it sounds great, and it's really, really good, and it's hard to fault. Aside from the vehicles, it's hard to fault. So I think it is going to join Crash 2 in Roscoe, but it's not going to be as high as Crash 2 in Roscoe. I think it's going to be a bit below it, because the vehicles were a bit excessive. But beyond that, pretty phenomenal game. Following in pretty similar footsteps is Spyro Year of the Dragon, which is also known as Spyro 3, because it is the third one. It is sort of interesting to see how the Spyro and Crash series sort of mimic each other. They had a pretty simple first game, they had a second game that improved on it in the right ways, They had a third game that sort of experimented in ways that were questionable. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. And then they had a fourth game that was not as good as the original 3, which is just interesting to think about. Anyway, Year of the Dragon, also known as Spyro 3, has similar problems to Crash Warped, I think, in that it took the improvements from Spyro 2 and kept them, but instead of building on that foundation, it sort of spread outwards and tried to experiment with some other things. And I think in Spyro 3, it's a lot more of an issue, a lot more blatant, and a lot more just a bad idea in Spyro 3 than it is in Crash 3. Because what Spyro Year of the Dragon does, right, is it's taking away from Spyro's gameplay, Spyro's regular gameplay, to flood it with all this other stuff. You've got 5 extra playable characters that are all pretty fucking bad, apart from Sheila, which is just Spyro who can't glide. Do you know what I mean? It's like, why are we doing this? And then there are lots of vehicles, the skateboard, the boat submarine thing. It's just like, do we have to do this? You know, the appeal of Spyro is going around to collect things, and in Spyro 3, there's a lot less of that because you're too distracted with all this other bullshit, and it's just sort of, it doesn't ruin the experience, but it just sort of gets in the way. It's like, you know, we'll just get through this and then we can get back to the good stuff, which is playing regular Spyro. Yeah, I think they went a bit overboard with it, and I think that was a mistake. It is still a very fun game overall, but the excessive amount of gimmicks and playable characters and vehicles that were just bad. Well, they weren't outright bad, but they were just like, they were just worse than the regular gameplay, and there really was no reason to have them. And some of them, like the skateboard, just appeared so many times. It's like, just fuck off. Let me play as Spyro. That's all I want. That's all I want from this game. It's called Spyro Year of the Dragon, not Sergeant Bird, let's fly around dropping bombs on cages for fucking half an hour. You know what I mean? It's just, it could have been so much better if there was less of that. So I think because the issue is so much bigger for the Spyro series than it is for Crash, I'm going to put Year of the Dragon in the Majesty of Autumn. It's still a good game, but the problems are much more extreme than Crash had with Warped, so I think it deserves to be knocked down a tier in the Majesty of Autumn. Honestly, I'm not calling this game bad. The Majesty of Autumn, that's a respectable tier to be in, and it should be proud, but you know, it took a few wrong steps, and that's what's holding it back from being a Roscoe game. And I think, you know, that's fair enough. That's a fair enough reason. After that, I then decided, against my better judgment, to play some non-platformers in the form of sports games. I played, I believe it was 6 PS1 sports games, and compiled them all together in a compilation review, and I have to say, that was a waste of time. I don't understand sports games, I don't get it. I just don't see the appeal. If you're a sports fan, surely you'd rather go watch or play the sport. If you're a game fan, surely you'd rather play a game with any sort of substance. I just don't understand who these sports games are for. I don't understand why you would play them. They're just all so lacking in substance. They're all so boring. Like, there's nothing to really say about them. I think the biggest offender is the fucking golf game. Like, who is sitting there with their PlayStation 1 thinking, you know what I really want to do? I really want to play some golf. Like, I just don't get it. Why? I can understand it a bit more with more modern games that have proper, like, career modes, and you can create your own player, your own athlete, your own sports person, whatever you want to fucking call it. I can get that. That puts you as a real person into the sport, which you might not be able to do if you've got no limbs, for example. But for everyone else who doesn't care as much, why would anyone want to play these games? They're just so incredibly boring. And I think, to no one's surprise, they all belong in Fart in the Shower. The only one I would consider taking out of, if I could like separate the 6 and put one in Stay Away From My Daughter, it would be Gran Turismo, I think was the racing game that I played. I can understand that. That was, you know, it was like Mario Kart without items. You know, that's fun. but especially the other 5, who would play that? Why would you play that? I just don't get it. Fart in the shower. And because I'm keeping them all together, because that's the rule that I just made up in my head just now, they're all going fart in the shower. And I think that's fair enough. After playing 6 god-awful PS1 sports games, I then moved on to Rayman, a much more iconic and beloved game character than Tiger Woods, for example. So Rayman was not a game I'd played before, not something I knew pretty much anything about, other than I think his creators are French. I think I'm aware of that, but that was about it at the time. I didn't really know what to expect from it as a game. And playing Rayman, it was fun for the first half. It was really solid, I really enjoyed it, it was challenging, but it was fair. Rayman was reliable to control, everything looked great, everything sounded great. It was off to a really solid first half. But then, at some point in the middle, there was like a switch that went off where the game just became an absolute gauntlet of unfair, brutal cruelty. I don't understand what happened, but everything became so unfair, everything became about trial and error. There was nothing you could really do to sort of make your way through the level and learn how to play it without dying and having to start all over again. And because of the way the life system was set up, it was just such a cruel and brutal experience. And I think, even though there was a lot of, fair stuff that did happen, the sort of occasions where it was so blatantly bullshit sort of overshadowed the whole thing and left a sour taste in my mouth. That might just be the lolly that I just ate. That's probably where the sourness is coming from. But, it's the part of the game that sticks out in my head the most, the unfairness, the unfair parts. Which is sort of a shame, because the rest of the game is really good and really enjoyable. But it's just those bits where they expect you to do these impossible tasks in your first try without any sort of warning or indication of danger. I just think, that's a really bad way of designing a game, and it just sucked a lot of the fun out of it. So because of that, Rayman is going to go in the majesty of autumn. When it's good, it's really good. When it's bullshit, I was furious. I had to resort to using save states. That's how bad it got. So I think the majesty of autumn is a reasonable place to put Rayman. Next up is Crash Team Racing. Now, this game, when I reviewed it, I was sort of overcome by this feeling of ecstasy and attachment where I didn't want the game to end at any point. Like, I did absolutely everything. I completed the adventure mode to 101%, I believe is what it is. I got all the platinum relics and everything. I went through and did all the time trials and beat Oxide's times and Entropy's times. Not in that order, because you have to do Entropy first, but you know what I mean. I did absolutely everything in that game, and I just did not want to let it go. I wanted to just keep playing it, because it's just such an amazing game. Even though it is just a party game, essentially. It's a kart racer. All you do is race around these tracks and throw items at each other. But it's just such a well-made game. The tracks are all fun, but I think the biggest thing that has going for it is just the actual gameplay itself, actually racing. The drift and boost mechanic, the handling of the vehicle, just all of it works so well. And I just did not want to put it down at any point. It's just brilliant. I'm struggling to think of anything negative to say about it. I guess, there are a few characters from the Crash series that are missing. That's sort of all I can think of. I can't think of anything else to hold against this game. It's just so nearly perfect. I'm almost willing to call it perfect, but I don't want to do that, because that means it has to be the best game of all time, and I'm not ready to make that claim. I've still got a lot of games I haven't played. There could be one that I don't know about that could be better than Crash Team Racing. How would I know? How would I know? But out of the games I have played, this Crash Team Racing is really high up there. So if I can't think of anything negative to say, I think it's destined to end up in Roscoe's tier. This is one of Roscoe's most highly treasured games. It's just amazing. I can't think of any way of faulting it. So yeah, Roscoe it is for Crash Team Racing. After the highs of Crash Team Racing, I was brought back down to earth with Spyro Season of Ice. Season of Ice, of course, being the first of the GBA Spyro games that I had never played or even seen before. And Spyro Season of Ice was a pretty mediocre introduction to them. I thought it was okay. You know, it captured the essence of Spyro, but it was quite repetitive. It was pretty, it was just alright. It's a lot of wandering around very similar environments. There just wasn't a lot of variation in the objectives. It was less satisfying to collect everything. It was just one of those games where it's just like, yeah, it's fine, but once you've played the first sort of few levels, you've kind of seen all of it. There really is no reason to keep going. I did keep going. I 100%ed the bloody thing, and it wasn't worth it. It's just a really repetitive, and it can be boring to play, which is a shame. So it's going to go in perineum because it's just okay. I can't think of anything particularly that's really good about it. It's not egregiously bad, it's just very repetitive, and it can be boring if you play it all together. I'm sure if you space the levels out, it might be more fun to do just one level every now and then, but if you play everything in quick succession like I did, you'll probably get bored of it very quickly, which is what happened to me. So I think perineum is a very fitting place for Spyro Season of Ice. We then move on to Croc 2. Now, after playing Croc Legend of the Gobbos and approaching this game, I sort of expected it to be more of the same, more sort of janky tank controls with very basic generic platforming. That's what I was expecting, but Croc 2 did pleasantly surprise me. It did fix the tank control issue, you got more fluid, easier to control movement, and that's all I really wanted to change about the first game. The locations are less generic. The whole game actually is less generic, I thought. It's just an all-around improvement on Croc 2. It also has, each level has its own unique objective, which I thought was really cool. It just adds a lot more personality. Even today, after having reviewed it some months ago, I still think about Roger Red Ant every now and again, because it was just such a memorable level. I think Croc 2 did a much better job of making a memorable experience than the first game, and it was more fun to play. It does have vehicles, as most platformers do, and as in most platformers, the vehicles are quite shit and just sort of take away from the whole experience. I sort of wish they weren't there. And also, like the first Croc game, Croc 2 also does have some pretty shit boss fights. They're not as bad, but they're still pretty bad. But overall, I think Croc 2 is an improvement over the first game, but it's not a massive improvement. It's sort of a slight improvement. So I think it's going to go into perineum as well, but it's going to be on the higher end of perineum. It's going to be closer to the to the balls than to the anus. I really did not have to say that, but I did, and here we are. I have to reap the consequences of my actions. Croc 2 going in perineum along with the first Croc game, but it's going to be higher up because it is a better game. Next up is Shantae, the original Shantae, but not the actual original because I played it on the Nintendo Switch, which is not the original hardware. The original hardware is the Game Boy Color. I didn't need to explain all that, it's not important. Anyway, Shantae. I recently got acquainted with the Shantae series. I think it's a really good series of platformers. I don't think it gets recognized enough. This game, Shantae, is the first one. And I think it's really good, especially for a Game Boy Color game. It has a lot going for it. Shantae as a character and her abilities are really interesting. I like the idea of having a genie character be able to transform into different creatures that each have unique abilities that help you traverse to areas you couldn't get to before. Shantae has this whole interconnected world thing going on, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, but here I think it does. Even if a lot of the locations are sort of recolors of each other, and you do a fair bit of backtracking, I think it does work, and I do like it. It makes the world feel more connected, I suppose, because it is, literally. The gameplay is fun, the music is amazing, it looks great. There's just a lot of things going for it. The only thing that's holding it back is, I guess, that just because it's a Game Boy Color game, there's only so much it's capable of doing, and it is very simple in its gameplay when you really boil it down, and it can be annoying to backtrack all the way, so I'm not going to put it up in Roscoe. I think it's a Majesty of Autumn sort of game. It has a lot going for it, with a few hang-ups, and I think that's a fair place for Shantae. Coming up next is Crash Bash. This was the only Crash game on the PS1 that I did not play growing up. I instead played it as a teenager, and it was fine. Having played it for the review, I think this is a bad game. I've had time to sit on it. I wasn't quite sure at the time, but I think this is a bad game. And it's not because of the gameplay. It's one of those things where the gameplay is alright, there's just not enough variation in it, and the way the game is built around it is really fucking flawed. It's sort of like a thing where you have a 50-story building, and along the way you have this massive staircase that's covered in slime and is very slippery and hard to get up. But at the top of each sort of section of stairs, you have like a little bowl of chocolates that you can take one from and then keep going. It's just a sort of thing where there's a lot of work to reach the end, and the end is probably not going to be worth it. I don't know if that whole analogy made sense. It sort of did in my head, and now I've explained it, I feel like a fucking... Anyway. The thing with Crash Bash is the minigames, some of them are really good and really fun. There are some that are not fun, and I would rather be burnt alive. And the way the game is built around them, requiring not only trophies but also crystals and gems and relics to reach the end, it's just too much, and it's a bad way to design a game. So I think the minigames in isolation are alright, but the whole experience is brought down by the way the game is built around it, and as such, Crash Bash is going in Stay Away From My Daughter. And if you don't agree with that, fucking fight me. Spyro 2 Season of Flame is up next. When I played this for the first time, which was for the review, I thought it was going to be just Season of Ice again. It was going to be boring, it was going to be repetitive, and I was going to get sick of it. But I was actually pleasantly surprised to find out that Season of Flame actually fixed a lot of the issues I had with Season of Ice. There's more variation in the objectives, there's a map, which is bloody helpful. It was built better, it was designed better, it's just an improvement all around, and I think, I wasn't expecting that, but it's a welcome change. So I think it belongs in the Majesty of Autumn because it was pretty fun to play. It was a bit easy, but that's not inherently a bad thing. It just sort of fixed everything that was wrong with Season of Ice, so I think, it deserves to be a tier higher. So yeah, Majesty of Autumn for Season of Flame. I've really got nothing overly negative to say other than the fact that it was easy and, it's never going to be as good as the console games. But, I think it still deserves to be in the Majesty of Autumn because it was a fun game and it is definitely an improvement over Season of Ice. Who lives in a pineapple under the sea? SpongeBob SquarePants. Battle for Bikini Bottom. That was a lot cooler in my head, and then I did it out loud, and I feel like I've aged about 40 years and my life is about to end. Anyway, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. This game was amazing. And I wasn't expecting it to be because it is a licensed game, and that usually means impending doom. But it really worked for this one. I think it was a really fun game. It was sort of like a linear collectathon, where the goal was to complete puzzles and platforming to earn spatulas, and the goal is to collect enough to save the world from Plankton's evil robot army. It was really fun. It was pretty easy, but there was a lot of variation. There was a lot going on. It had a lot to offer. Multiple playable characters, but not too many. Fucking Spyro Year of the Dragon. Keep it in check, please. It just did everything right, and it's sort of hard to fault. The only thing I do remember not liking was because I played the Xbox version through the 360, the sky had this weird, trippy kaleidoscope effect, and that was a bit distracting. And also, going for 100% was a bit much. You require a lot of shiny objects. I think the end total is over like 68,000, which requires you to do a lot of farming, and that's a bit excessive, and it wasn't really worth all the effort. It might have even been a lot more than that. I can't remember. I did spend a long time farming shiny objects. But yeah, overall, really fun game, hard to fault. I definitely recommend it. And I've got to put it in a tier. I'm doing this tier list. I forgot to put it in a tier. I need a break. I'm going to put it in Roscoe because it's very hard to fault. Very solid game. Would totally recommend it. Roscoe tier. We're now up to Banjo-Tooie. This is probably my most controversial opinion, and by that I mean pretty much everyone said I was wrong in the comments, because I think Banjo-Tooie is awful. I think it's a really bad game, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's very big and empty. There's not a lot to do, so most of the game is just walking around aimlessly. There's a lot less of an emphasis on collecting. The interconnected world thing I think didn't really work. It just meant more walking around trying to get jiggies because you had to do things in some levels that affected things in other levels, and it was just a nightmare. This is one of the few games I couldn't bring myself to finish, which was astounding because the first Banjo-Kazooie game was amazing. So to have this one be so just bad was shocking to me. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was really hard to play this game. It was really boring. It really dragged out. There wasn't a lot happening. Yeah, it just sucked. But there is a silver lining. Playing this game did result in Ode to Banjo-Tooie. I made a fucking song. How cool is that? And it still gets stuck in my head every now and then. You know, fuck Banjo-Tooie, you are fucking dog shit. I mumble that to myself all the time, which is a bit self-obsessed, because I was the one who made it, but it was really catchy, so I was really proud of that. So I guess playing the game was worth it in the end, if nothing else, for the song. But yeah, this game was not fun. This is not a good game. And I'm going to put it in Stay Away From My Daughter, because even though it is bad, it is technically a functional game, and it can be fun for some people, as I found out in the comment response to that video, because everyone said I was wrong. And for some reason people like this game, and I don't understand why. But yeah, I think it's bad, so it's going in Stay Away From My Daughter, and there's fuck all you can do about it. I then moved on to Luigi's Mansion. Luigi's Mansion, not a series I know very much about, other than the fact that it stars Luigi and is about ghosts. Luigi's Mansion, I thought was a pretty fun game. It was like one big Legend of Zelda dungeon. Like one big Legend of... Oh god. It was like one big Legend of Zelda dungeon. I don't know why that was so hard to say. Yeah, it was really fun. I've not played a game like it. Going ghost hunting, vacuuming up currency, ghosts, solving puzzles, using elements to manipulate the world. It was just a really interesting and unique game. I've not played anything like it before, and I've not played anything like it since. So yeah, I was really fond of it, and I think it's a really solid... It was a bit short, and it can be a bit repetitive, given that the only thing you really do gameplay-wise is suck up ghosts, and that sort of combat routine is very much the same thing every time. But it is still fun, so I think Luigi's Mansion, as short and slightly repetitive as it is, was really fun and belongs in the Majesty of Autumn. I then went on to play Medieval. Medieval was a surprisingly good game. I sort of wasn't expecting it to be, I'm not sure why, but it ended up being a lot of fun. Obviously it was off to a rocky start when I found out that circle was jump. That is a crime that should be punishable by death. But overall, Medieval was a lot of fun. Obviously the atmosphere, the aesthetic, the environments, and the music as well, absolutely incredible. It's hard to match that level of quality in a game, I think, especially for the PS1. That's pretty impressive stuff. The gameplay was very straightforward, very combat heavy, but also including some puzzle solving and problem solving. I did like that. Yeah, it just had a lot to offer. There was a lot of variety in the environments. It just had a lot going for it. Other than circle being jump, and also the really strange life system. I can't really think of anything wrong with it. Oh, the bosses were quite bad. Yeah, the bosses were pretty shit. But that's sort of a theme. I feel like all boss fights ever are shit. But in these ones in Medieval were particularly bad. Even though they look quite cool, like the stained glass monster, they're pretty bad gameplay-wise. But other than that, Medieval is a really good game, and I think it belongs with Luigi's Mansion in the Majesty of Autumn. A very solid year for the Halloween games, it turns out. Next up was Crash Bandicoot XS, also known as The Huge Adventure. This game, when I reviewed it, I found was quite hard to talk about, simply because it's sort of... I don't want to say it's lacking substance, but it's very straightforward and basic. It's just a GBA 2D adaptation of the Crash Bandicoot games. So I did find it quite hard to talk about. That's why I sort of resorted to the whole subplot of the planets talking to each other and trying to figure out how to get Earth back to its regular size just by saying Oishblagen to each other. I thought that was quite fun, but it's got nothing to do with the game, really. But the game is pretty solid. It's very good for a 2D adaptation of Crash Bandicoot games on the GBA. It sort of carries over the tradition of having standard platforming levels, vehicle levels, and shit bosses. Everything's all there. It was just a pretty solid adaptation. There's nothing inherently bad about it. There's nothing extremely good about it. It's sort of middle of the road, decent game, decent adaptation of Crash Bandicoot. So I think Perineum is a very fitting place for it. Following that was Spyro Attack of the Rhinox. Now, I was very disappointed with this game. Had the trajectory of the GBA Spyro games followed, this game should have been great, but it just wasn't. Like, it sort of returned to Season of Ice levels of quality. I don't really know why they did what they did with this game. They turned the whole game into a giant, never-ending web of fetch quests, and it was just so boring and shit. Like, that's just such a bad way of adapting the Spyro formula. It just wasn't fun. The game became less about exploring levels to collect, because you can't get everything. You need to go to different levels to pick up items to use in other levels and get keys from these stupid side missions to find chests that you couldn't unlock before, and it's just... This is another one of those fuck-off games where it's just really bloated. It's like Banjo-Tooie, it's like Year of the Dragon. It's one of those fuck-off games where just let me play the regular game. Why do we have to do all this other shit? You know what I mean? It was just disappointing. I wish it could have been more like Season of Flame, but it just wasn't. So it wasn't outright bad, so I'm not going to put it in Stay Away From My Daughter, but it wasn't great. So I'm going to put it in the lower end of Perineum. Somewhere around Season of Ice. I think that's a fitting place for it. We then had Rayman 2, which was colossally different to the first Rayman. It kind of caught me off guard. Rayman 2 was excellent. It was a great game. I'm sort of not confident in saying that it is definitively an amazing game, because there are like different versions of it that all have slight differences and ways of doing things that I'm not fully aware of, so I don't want to claim every Rayman 2 as being great, but the one that I played was pretty good. The gameplay was simple, but fun. I liked the variety and different gameplay elements. You had different vehicles, you had different abilities that Rayman could use, but they didn't get in the way of the main gameplay, which was just simple platforming. That should always be the focus for a platformer, is the platforming. It was a lot of fun. It was presented well, the music was great. The only thing I didn't really like was the combat. I thought it was a bit, I don't know, uninspired and lame. I would have rather just jumped on the enemy and gotten on with my day, but now I have to stand there for about 5 minutes fighting that fucking ninja. Oh my god, that ninja robot pirate would not leave me alone. What's the deal with that guy? Stalker alert. Anyway, Rayman 2 was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. Considering the only bad thing about it that I can think of was the combat, which is only a minor part of it, I think Rayman 2 belongs in Roscoe. I think it's a Roscoe level game. I think that's fair. Yeah, Roscoe. And finally, the last game of the year was Ape Escape. Because of the way I did the video, which was like this sort of a David Attenborough style documentary sort of thing, that was how I presented it. Because I did it like that, I feel like I didn't quite get my opinions on it across as well as I would have otherwise. But I did enjoy the game. I thought it was very unique. I've never played anything like it. The control scheme, very odd. did take some getting used to, but it wasn't outright bad. It was just, it took a lot to get used to. The gameplay was interesting. It was mostly fun, but the monkeys did have no chill, and that was a bit frustrating. And towards the middle, I did sort of tire of the formula until I got to the castle levels, which is where it sort of picked me back up and got me back on board, because I started to have fun again then, because those levels were really well designed and really interesting. But yeah, I thought it was pretty decent, pretty experimental, not something I've seen before, and I did enjoy it somewhat. It was easy, it was a bit repetitive, it did have... it had issues, let's just say that. It had issues. So I don't think it's one of the best games I played in the year, but it was pretty decent and I did enjoy it. So I think somewhere on the higher end of Perineum is a good place to put Ape Escape. Because, you know, it was presented nicely, it had good music, and the gameplay was decent, even if it was a bit odd. But yeah, I don't think I'll be visiting that game again, because it is a bit weird, and I didn't enjoy it that much, but I did enjoy it somewhat, so I think it's fair to put it in Perineum. Alright, and that's all of the games that I reviewed in 2023 and 2022. Cool. Alright, and stop record.